Out of cold Christmas Eve, in the middle of a fierce snowstorm, Lucas Miller, a lone mechanic, made a daring decision to remove the battery from his only car to help a strange woman stranded on the road. Little did he know that that small action would set in motion a chain of events that would completely change his life. That woman, Emma Hart, is none other than the CEO of a large corporation, and she did not forget her promise to repay the favor. But does kindness really pay off, or is it all just a Christmas miracle? Sometimes a simple act can open the door to a new life, but Lucas never expected that door to open the moment he decided to help a stranger. Welcome to Kindness Stories, where small actions can create big miracles. Today, we will explore a heartwarming story of kindness on a cold Christmas night, where an ordinary mechanic did something extraordinary that even he did not expect. Christmas lights were everywhere in the small town of Riverdale. Twinkling lights hung from the windows of the houses, red ribbons were wrapped around the lampposts, and Santa Claus and reindeer were placed on the front lawns. The Christmas spirit was everywhere. The bells rang softly from the church in the center of town, and the laughter of children playing in the snow. But for Lucas Miller, Christmas was anything but special. He stood by the old radiator in Mason's Auto Repair, a repair shop on the edge of town, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. There were no twinkling Christmas lights, just cold fluorescence on the yellowed walls. The smell of oil and metal was strong. Lucas wiped sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his faded gray jacket. His face was lined, not with age, he was only 32, but with years of hard work. His rough, calloused hands were gripping a wrench, tightening the last bolt on the old pickup truck of Greg, a regular customer. "Done, Greg. You can drive home safely now," Lucas said, his voice warm but not without weariness. "Well, you're my savior, Lucas. Thanks, boy," Greg laughed, handing him a $10 bill as a tip. Lucas smiled, politely declining. "Keep it for gingerbread men for the kids, Greg." Greg laughed, said goodbye, and drove away, leaving Lucas watching the headlights disappear into the falling snow. The night was getting darker, and the snow was falling harder. Lucas sighed, shoved his hands in his coat pockets, and looked up at the dark sky. "Another Christmas all by myself," he whispered, feeling empty inside. Normally, Christmas is a time for rest, but this year, Lucas couldn't take a break. He needed the money. He was 3 months behind on rent, plus credit card debt from last winter, making it hard for him to stop working. Mr. Mason, the shop owner, promised to pay Lucas more if he worked overtime on Christmas Eve, and he readily agreed. Lucas took off his dirty gloves and looked at the clock on the wall. 7:45 p.m. The wind was howling outside the window. No one's coming this late, he thought, preparing to pack up his tools. Just then, a bright light shone through the frosted glass into the shop. The headlights of a luxury SUV shone directly into the front door, blinding. Lucas squinted through the foggy window. A pearl-white Range Rover was struggling to back up and forward, over and over again, unable to move. The wheels spun, snow flying. Lucas shook his head, sighed, then pulled on his thick coat, pulled on his woolen hat, and stepped outside. Do people really think luxury cars can survive a blizzard? Lucas thought, walking slowly towards the car. The cold wind blew against his face, and tiny snowflakes clung to his eyelashes and coat. As he got closer, the window rolled down, revealing a woman sitting inside. Meteor, character introduction. The woman looked different from all the other townspeople, a light beige fur coat, her blonde hair tied back in an elegant style, her face lightly but delicately made up. Her blue eyes glanced over Lucas with initial suspicion. "Is your car stuck?" Lucas asked loudly, his voice above the wind. "Yeah, the wheels are slipping and there seems to be some problem with the engine. I can't get it to start," she replied, sounding a little frustrated. "I'm trying to get home by 9 in time for the family Christmas party." "Have you called for help?" Lucas asked. "My phone is almost dead and there's no signal here." She shook her head. Her voice sounded broken from the cold. "You're in luck. I can tow your car to the shop and check it out," Lucas said, patting the hood. "Need help?" The woman hesitated. She studied Lucas for a moment, as if weighing whether he could be trusted. "Fine. If you can pull it back, I'll pay you," she said, choosing her words carefully. Lucas quickly returned to the shop, drove his old truck out, and attached a chain to the front of her car. He adjusted the chain carefully, saying as he worked, "Luke, nice car, but next time, if there's a snowstorm, don't drive alone on this road." "It's not that I don't know, but I have an important meeting in New York and now I'm late for my family appointment," she explained. Lucas frowned but said nothing. He got into the truck, turned on his hazard lights, and began to tow the SUV toward the shop. Lucas's pickup was slow but steady. By the time they reached the garage, snow had piled up on the roof. Lucas bent down, popped the hood of the SUV, and checked the battery. He realized it was dead, probably because the snow was so deep that it was overloading the electrical system. "Drop it. Let's find something. Need a battery replacement, but the parts store is closed this afternoon," Lucas said, his voice thoughtful. So what am I supposed to do? I can't wait until tomorrow morning," she said, her impatience obvious. Lucas thought for a moment, glancing at his old pickup truck, his only car. He looked at the woman's SUV and then back at his own. Was he being too sensitive? "Wait a minute, I have an idea," Lucas muttered. He decided to take the battery from his car and put it in hers. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cold weather. She stood looking at him, saying nothing, her eyes showing a hint of surprise. "Are you sure? You won't be able to get home?" "Of course. I hope you get a lot of sleep." Lucas just smiled. "I have nowhere to go." That's all. Lucas's words took her by surprise. There was no longer any wall between them. For the first time, Emma looked at him with gratitude. Or else they were looking at the same thing at once. For once she saw a face she recognized from the photos and the drain pipes. "Just make sure you get home safely," Lucas said, tightening the last screw. Lucas sighed as he tightened the last screw on the battery terminal. The snow was still falling heavily, the flakes as fine as powder clinging to his hair and the shoulders of his jacket. He wiped his face with his sleeve, but soon new snow was clinging to it. Sitting in the car, Emma Hart turned the key, and after a few short seconds, the engine roared to life and started. Rumble, 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 rumble. Now Chase had plenty of time to reflect on his life, which seemed like a blur in his heavy-duty mind. "It works." Lucas stood up, closing the hood decisively. "You can go home now." Emma rolled down the window, leaning over to look at him with a different look than when she first arrived. Gone was the arrogance, only surprise and gratitude. "Did you just remove the battery from your car to put in mine?" she asked, her voice a little uncertain. "Either wearing her loaf of bread or half off a dessert." Lucas chuckled, shrugging. "I'll find another one later. You need to go home now, right?" Emma was silent for a moment. She had never met anyone so willing to sacrifice for another, especially in such dire circumstances. She looked up at Lucas as if she wanted to say something, but then she sighed. You really don't want the money?" she asked, her voice much softer this time. Lucas shook his head. "I just did what I could. Christmas is about getting everyone home safe." Emma stared at Lucas, her mind racing with images of rich men who put their own interests first. But this mechanic was the opposite. "I've never met anyone like you," she whispered, her eyes softening. The SUV pulled out of the parking lot, leaving deep tire tracks in the snow. Lucas stood there, arms crossed, watching the headlights blend into the night. A strange emptiness filled his heart. His old truck wouldn't start. He looked at his old truck, feeling a sense of despondency creeping in. It was the only vehicle he had. Am I gonna walk home? He looked at the snow-covered road ahead, knowing that the journey home would take at least an hour of walking in the cold. The blizzard was getting worse, the wind howling outside like a pack of wolves. Lucas huddled in his pocket, pulling his phone out but finding that the battery was dead. Wow, this is a perfect Christmas, he thought, looking up at the dark sky. Rumbling sound rang out in the distance. Headlights shone from the beginning of the road, blinding against the white snow. An unfamiliar car slowly approached the parking lot. "Get out!" Bonner shouted. At first, Lucas thought it was another passenger who needed help, but when the headlights dimmed, he realized it wasn't a passenger's car. It was Emma's pearl-white SUV. The car door opened and Emma stepped out, her face flushed from the cold. She walked quickly toward Lucas, bringing with her a gust of snowy wind. "You can't just stand here waiting," Emma said, her voice stern but warm. "Get in the car, I'll take you home." Lucas raised an eyebrow, confused. "What are you doing back? I told you to go home." Emma crossed her arms, her eyes sharp but not angry. "You think I can leave the person who helped me stand shivering in the snowstorm?" "I'm fine," Lucas tried to defend himself, but his voice was starting to shake from the cold. "Listen, Lucas, I hate to owe anyone anything, especially someone like you," she said firmly, her voice full of the authority of a woman used to chairing board meetings. "Now, either you get in the car or I'll stand here with you until morning." Lucas looked at her for a moment, then chuckled. "You're stubborn." "I don't listen to any mechanic," Emma smirked, her eyes confident but also a little friendlier. On the way home, Lucas sat in the passenger seat, looking at the houses on both sides of the road with their bright Christmas lights. The space inside the car was much warmer than the biting cold outside. Emma glanced at Lucas as if considering something. "Have you ever thought about doing anything other than being a mechanic?" Lucas chuckled. "I'm good at fixing things, but not good at doing anything else. Why do you ask?" Emma was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "My company has a large maintenance shop. We're always short of reliable people." She glanced at him. "If you want, I can help you find a more stable job." Lucas snorted, not quite believing it. "You just met me. You don't know who I am." Emma turned, her eyes sharp. "I know you're the kind of guy who would take the battery out of your car and install it in a stranger's. That's enough for me to trust you." Lucas sat in silence. Neither of them said another word, but the air in the car grew warmer, and not just from the heating. The next morning, Lucas woke up in his small apartment. He sipped hot coffee, sitting by the window, watching the snow fall outside. It was Christmas, and Riverdale was silent in the freezing cold. As he put down his coffee, a loud noise came from outside. Lucas frowned and walked to the door. What he saw was unbelievable. A brand new silver-gray pickup truck parked right in front of his house. Lucas stood, his heart pounding, and swore at the sight of it. He looked around but saw no one. A card was taped to the car window. "Merry Christmas, Lucas. Thanks for reminding me that kindness doesn't need a reason. Emma Hart." Lucas stood there for a few seconds, frozen. He ran his hand over the hood, feeling every smooth line. His heart pounded in his chest, emotions surging. That evening, Lucas received a call from an unknown number. "This is Emma. I want to know if you've made up your mind." He hesitated to get to the point. Lucas held the phone, was silent for a moment, then smiled. "When can I start?" Emma chuckled on the other end of the line. "Tomorrow." That Christmas, Lucas found something he didn't expect. a life-changing opportunity through kindness. A month after Christmas Eve, Lucas Miller stood in front of the large glass doors of Hart & Co.'s headquarters building in downtown New York City. The light from the morning sky reflected off the clear glass, creating sparkling rays like tiny stars. In contrast to the quiet town of Riverdale, New York, appeared with bustling people, honking cars, and the hurried footsteps of people rushing to work. Lucas adjusted his jacket collar, smoothing down the brand-new light blue shirt he had just bought yesterday. He never thought he would be standing in a place like this, let alone that he was about to become a technical maintenance supervisor for a large company. "First time in New York," a familiar voice called out from behind. Lucas turned around, and before him was Emma Hart, her blonde hair tied back neatly, wearing a luxurious ash-gray coat, looking both more powerful and friendlier than when they first met. "Yeah, first time," Lucas laughed, stuffing his hands in his pockets, looking around like a kid in the city for the first time. Emma looked at him, smiling slightly. "How does it feel?" Lucas thought for a moment. "Unusual, but not bad. At least this time I don't have to worry about snow getting under my wheels." Blink number 6. More people die from car accidents than death from COVID. They both laughed. Emma tilted her head slightly toward the door. "Come on, I'll show you around the maintenance shop today. They're waiting for you." Hart & Co.'s maintenance workshop is located in the basement of the main building. It is a large space with dozens of heavy machinery, modern tools, automatic maintenance systems, and especially a staff of more than 20 people, each wearing neat uniforms and working in harmony. "You new?" A tall, middle-aged man with a goatee waved from afar. "You're Lucas, right? We've heard a lot about you from Emma." "Hope is a good thing," Lucas stepped forward, extending his hand for a shake. "They said you were the one who would take the battery out of your car to help someone else," he laughed. "Nobody here would do that, I tell you the truth." Lucas smiled awkwardly and looked around. It was a far cry from the old garage in Riverdale. Here everything was systematic, automated, and much more modern. But Lucas wasn't worried, because machines were still machines. They might be different in form, but their essence was the same. "Don't worry, I know what I need to do," Lucas replied confidently. That evening, after his first shift, Lucas left the building. He let himself out into the cold New York night air, taking a deep breath. He was no longer the small-time mechanic of Riverdale. He stepped to the curb and pressed the button on the car key in his pocket. There was a beep. His silver pickup, a gift from Emma, was parked across the street. Lucas walked slowly to the car, his hand lightly touching the hood, feeling overwhelmed. It was more than just a car. It was a symbol of opportunity, of a new beginning. As he sat in the driver's seat, his phone vibrated. A text message appeared on the screen. "Emma Hart, how was your day?" Lucas smiled, his fingers gliding across the screen, and replied briefly, "Okay, thanks, and thanks for everything." Immediately, Emma replied, "It's just the beginning, Lucas." A few days later, one evening, Lucas left the maintenance shop later than usual because he had to check one of the big machines. It was drizzling, the streets were wet, and small puddles had formed on the sidewalks. New Year's Eve was only 2 days away. As he stepped outside, he saw a homeless man huddled under an awning. His ragged clothes did little to protect him from the cold. Lucas took a few steps past him, but then stopped. Something made him turn back. The old man looked up at Lucas, his eyes weary. "Don't you have any change?" he asked. Lucas stared at him for a moment, then suddenly remembered the moment he had stood in the snow, without a car, without anyone to help. And then Emma was back. He took off his coat and draped it over the old man's shoulders. "Here, you need it more than I do." The man's eyes widened, suddenly looking at Lucas in disbelief. "You'll be cold," he said, his voice shaking. "It's okay," Lucas replied. "I'm used to it." On the way home, Lucas looked in the rearview mirror and saw the old man still sitting there, but this time he had wrapped his coat tightly around him. A warm feeling rose in his heart. The phone vibrated again. This time, it was a text from Emma. "Emma Hart, are you okay, Lucas?" He smiled. He knew Emma wasn't just asking about work. She's smart. "Lucas, fine, better than ever. Just..." That night, Lucas arrived at his new apartment, a small, cozy place in upstate New York. He made himself a cup of hot coffee and sat by the window. The city lights twinkled outside, not unlike the Christmas lights in Riverdale. But this time, they didn't feel lonely. He remembers everything, from that snowy night in Riverdale, to meeting Emma Hart, to deciding to remove the battery from his car to help someone else. Kindness always comes back to you, one way or another, Lucas tells himself. His life changed, not because of a new car or a better job, but because he chose to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. Outside the window, it started to snow again. Lucas's Christmas is over, but the magic of that Christmas will stay with him forever. And it's a story about how one act of kindness can change a life. Lucas gave without expecting anything in return, but what he received was more than he could have ever dreamed of. Remember, sometimes with just a small act, you can be the fire that warms someone in the coldest storm. If you love stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories to spread kindness every day. See you in the next story, because kindness always has a way of coming back, sometimes in ways you don't expect.